Thank you very, very much, Vajrashura. That was a really lovely, beautiful introduction, and I think it really communicated the area, really. I haven't really prepared anything this evening, and I think it's because of, you really covered it in the introduction, to do with that indefinable something or other that you can't really put into words. It's also the fact I've just been doing a lot of talks this morning. In fact, I was speaking to Nagpur, well, a lot of cities in India, in honour of Bhante's passing, and so I've been doing a lot of teaching lately, so it's become a little bit hard to kind of think before giving a talk. So I thought, well, tonight this is going to be a more intimate occasion, so perhaps I don't need to prepare anything. I can just turn up and just talk, because I'm with very close friends. Obviously, the community I'm very, very close to, and I'm sitting in the midst of them, and that is, an incredible experience, to be with the intimacy of the community. And it was so lovely just seeing you all arriving, seeing Vajrashura first, and seeing you all, and the pleasure that we're getting from seeing you all, even though you're on a screen and we're here, but nonetheless there's a real pleasure in that, and a real feeling of intimacy and friendship, old friends and new friends arriving. I do find this Zoom phenomena rather poignant, actually, because on the one hand it really is lovely to see people, but I always feel this sadness that I can't actually be with the people I'm seeing on a screen. So it's a very sort of it's quite complex, I find, emotionally, this sort of situation. And it's a poignant day, 2 years on from Bhante's death, and I was thinking about what it was like getting the news here that Bhante had died. We kind of knew it was coming, I think. I can remember the precise moment it happened. I was on the telephone to Padmajoti, that's Aloka's wife, and she was worried about what was happening to Bhante, and I had my computer on, and into the inbox the next message was, Bhante has died, and I told Padmajoti that he died. So that was very, very strong, because Padmajoti is someone who has very deep feelings for Bhante, and then it was putting down the phone and just making sure that everybody in the community knew that Bhante had died. And it was a very, very gloomy day anyway, I seem to recall, in Norfolk. It was a very dark grey day. I don't know if it was raining, but it was a very dark grey and a very, very silent day anyway. It seemed peculiarly silent, and it just got more silent. The atmosphere became very sober, very silent, very naturally meditative. The community just seemed to sort of gravitate together in the retreat centre lounge around the fire, and we just sort of sat together really and wandered around. I can't really remember everything we did on that day. I think we probably did chanting and puja and meditation, but the main feeling was being silent together. There wasn't, as I recall on that occasion, tears or anything of that nature. It was more like something has happened. Something very, very large has happened. Life has changed. And we need to meditate on that. We need to contemplate that, get used to that. That was the feeling. For myself, I've known Bhante since I was a boy, really, since I was 17. And Bhante completely changed my life. I'll maybe say a bit more about that as the talk goes on, but I just want to dwell a bit on those days following Bhante's death. We went to Adhisthana. The timing of Bhante's death was impeccable, really. Just before a meeting of the College of Public Preceptors, a big gathering of preceptors coming from all over the world. You know, and an order weekend, I think a men's order weekend, College of Public Preceptors meeting, a women's order weekend. So there was a natural gathering at Adhisthana. It's very interesting living here with Sangharakshita, although Sangharakshita's left us now. He talked, I went for a walk with him when he was here, and we were talking, I was asking what it was like, you know, caring for Bhante, and we were talking about Bhante's death, and Sangharakshita was convinced that Bhante didn't die of whatever they said he died of. Bhante just decided it was time. He really had that feeling that Bhante just decided this is the time now. I don't know if that's true, but I did reflect on the fact that Bhante did receive one of his initiations from Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, which he can't share with us. It was something just given to him, which he can't pass on. It is the instructions, the secret instructions of Po Wat, the transference of consciousness to Amitabha's heart. That was an oral transmission from Dilgo Khyentse. So Bhante did have the instructions to consciously transfer consciousness to another dimension. We'll never know. But, you know, there's something about Bhante that was so aware, so conscious. You know, I can't imagine him dying unconsciously, if you see what I mean. I just can't imagine that. I've seen him in so many situations and, you know, seen his mindfulness and his awareness being his self-possession. I can't imagine him going into death without that awareness and without that consciousness. And at Adhisthana it was, you know, we were eventually, of course, there was that Bhante lying in that shrine room, and, you know, going into that shrine room where he was lying, where he was laid out in his robes. That was remarkable, sitting there in silence, taking a last darshan of Bhante, and doing a lot of, personally, I did a lot of circumambulation around that little shrine room. I must admit, one of the main feelings I had when I meditated, well, that was here after Bhante died, was one of bliss and liberation. Not my own. I didn't feel it was my own feeling. I really felt that I was in touch with Bhante, actually. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I was making that up. But every time I sat and I thought of Bhante, I just felt of something unbounded and ecstatic, as if Bhante had really taken off and gone, you know, where we don't know. That was my feeling. That was my experience, which I labelled in that particular way. And it was really wonderful being at Adhisthana. So many people were coming to view Bhante, to sit with Bhante, and there was a tremendous feeling of harmony in the Sangha and unity in the Sangha on a very, very deep level. And, you know, at the funeral, of course, so many people came, and so many people, very old friends who I hadn't seen for years and years and years, who'd heard about Bhante's death and wanted to come and honour him in that way. Not just order members, but friends from long, long ago, just wanting to be there. And the whole way in which the funeral was organised and conducted was done so beautifully with you know, very moving speeches, you know, Subhuti and Dharmadina and Amoga Siddhi, of course, and Parami, and so on, beautifully done, and the chanting. It was very interesting when we were waiting before the funeral actually started. It was another very grey day, one of those grey, grim November days, and cold, and the promise of rain. And I was with a woman public preceptor from New Zealand, and she said, "Oh, it's a really grim day, isn't it?" And for some reason, I don't know why these words came out of my mouth. I said, "Don't worry, there'll be rainbows soon. And sure enough, there was a rainbow appeared over the small shrine room where Bhante's body was laid out. I mean, it really was strange. I mean, I didn't know there was a rainbow coming. I really didn't. It wasn't like I was sort of reading the future. It just went poof, just out of my mouth like that. And I heard people told us who were driving to Adhisthana that they were driving through rainbows. And I like to think that even nature was responding to this incredible event. Even nature wanted to put on a bit of a show in response to the passing of this great man, this incredible man, this extraordinary man who in many ways was very unassuming, even though he was extraordinarily bold and confident and visionary, but in other respects I think was genuinely a modest man in my experience. I didn't feel, I must say, during those times anything like grief or anything like that. I really didn't feel that. I felt sobered, yes, something very big has happened. But then after all the funeral things, I was walking around that atrium where there was the Sangharakshita exhibition, and I was just looking at Bhante, the photographs of Bhante's life, and the different things that he'd done, and very moved at seeing, I think it was on that occasion, his handwritten copy in that beautiful hand he had of the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, which was a very important text for Bhante. We were just looking at these things, and then suddenly I just started sobbing. I just couldn't stop myself, and I thought, well, this is really weird, because I know I'm not crying because I'm sad. I know this isn't grief. It's not that. And I realised I was crying out of gratitude. I just felt this immense gratitude and a genuine humbling that a man of that stature, of such greatness, who'd really lived a life, really lived, a man of such vision, who'd affected so many people in so many different ways, had actually shown a keen interest in me, a personal interest in me, had really shown me encouragement from a very young age. The man I most revered, the most developed man, if you like, the most enlightened man I've ever met. Somebody like that showing an interest in me and really encouraging me to live this life to the full from a very young age. Well, that's an extraordinary thing to receive. That's an extraordinary thing to receive. And I just felt so much, gratitude and overwhelming gratitude, a gratitude that I could never possibly repay, not in this life or in lives to come. In terms of what I've been given by Bhante, I can't repay that. That's impossible. And the thing is, I never ever felt in any of my communications with Bhante any demand that I should give him anything. I never felt any expectation from his side. The only, he'd urge me to do things. He'd, in some ways, be quite, on occasion, quite challenging, but it was never for him. It was always for the good of the Dhamma, the good of the Sangha, my own good. That's quite a thing to say about someone. There was never any pressure put on me for anything for him personally. I always felt an incredible sense of freedom with Bhante. Whenever I was with him, I always felt completely safe, completely protected, completely, seen, to use that sort of language, witnessed. So, it's a very, these memories are coming back from the time of Bhante's death and what followed. There was another experience I had of being very upset. This was more of the nature of sadness. It was when I returned to Adhisthana to, I think it was to lead a retreat or to be on a meeting or something like that. And I realised Bhante wasn't there. I realised he wasn't there, and I really missed him. When I used to go to Adhisthana, even if I didn't go to see him, and I always used to try and see him, just only need 10 minutes just to make my pranam, my prostration, just to see him, just to have a conversation, or not. But I didn't have to do that. I just knew he was there. And then I went and I realised he wasn't there. He wasn't there. And I really missed him. And, you know, yes, I know all the things we say, which are quite right, and he would agree with them. Bhante's in our heart. Bhante's in the Dharma that he's left. Bhante's with us. Even some people saying he's with us more than he ever was in life. No, I'm sorry, I don't agree with that. Bhante was not there. He'd gone. And that meant that there was a particular quality, a particular presence, a particular person with a special quality that I could not go and revere. I think that was the thing, you know, to really express my reverence to a man who I knew I could revere. Well, that wasn't there. It's not that there aren't other people that I look up to. I mean, there are many order members I look up to. I have my own Kalyana Mitras, but Bhante is my teacher. Bhante is my guru. He's my acharya. He's my upadhyaya, my private and public preceptor. That means, according to in the Indian way of talking about things. He's my Kalyana Mitra, my teacher, my educator, and he has been my connection with the deepest Dharma, the most profound Dharma, not just the clear Dharma, not just the broad Dharma, but the deepest Dharma in his very being. I'm not necessarily talking about words or ideas or teachings. I'm talking about his being. And I could not go and be with that, be with somebody who embodied that. I can be with it in other ways. Of course, I bring Bhante to mind every day, every single day. I bring Bhante to mind, and I find that a tremendous inspiration when I'm meditating. You know, when I bring Bhante to mind, I meditated with Bhante years ago on order conventions where he'd lead us through sadhanas and meditations, and you know, sitting with Bhante, you know, you're with the stillest person you could ever be with. This deep stillness and this deep mystery, and well, when I bring Bhante to mind, I become concentrated very easily, because I'm with someone who's really meditating. I mean, recently I've been finding a quick way to meditate on shunyata. Yes, a quick way to meditate on shunyata. If you can forget all the analysis and all the words, I just have to think of Bhante, because I know that Bhante knew all about that, was deeply in touch with that. And when I meditate on Bhante and sort of ask him, as it were, not in sort of formalized words, but just sort of, you know, silently ask him to say, look, or more or less, look, Bhante, you know what this is. How about showing it to me? And something happens. Something opens up. A different dimension opens up. So Vajrashura talked about that indefinable something. Well, I really feel that. You know, if somebody were to ask me, well, why is Sangharakshita your teacher? You know, and I could go through so many doctrines and teachings and this and that and the other, but it's not about that. It's not about that at all. It's about a man of vision, a man of being, a man of bhava, to use a man in touch with the life of life. That's why Bhante is my teacher. And yes, I met him when I was 17 in Brighton. I'd very quickly connected with the Dharma while I was still living with my parents. I was more or less thrown out of school at 16. I was terribly bored at school. I was uneducatable, I think, a really obnoxious little twit, really. Quite right that they threw me out. And I worked as a gardener down the road from where we lived. But that was good, being a gardener. I think it sort of calmed me down a bit. And for various reasons, I started to find my way to books on Buddhism and Lama Govinda especially. And it was very, very clear that if you wanted to make any kind of progress on the path, you need to learn meditation and you need to learn it from a guru. Those were two things. Now, in those days, Buddhism was very hard to find. You wouldn't find Buddhism in the Yellow Pages. Remember Yellow Pages? Shows how long ago it is. There was, of course, no internet, nothing like that. And by chance, I found the FWBO as it was, in the form of Buddhadasa, the great Buddhadasa, teaching, starting activities in a house in a suburb of Brighton. And I connected immediately. The first night, many of you have heard this, full-length Metabhavana, sevenfold puja. By the end of the mantras, I knew I was going to be a Buddhist. I even knew I was going to be an order member. I'd only met one an hour and a half before, or whatever it was, but I just knew. I don't know how I knew, but I felt a quiet joy and certainty that I'd found what I was looking for. Thank goodness it was the puja. I think if it had been a very slow, gentle, meditation instruction where you're concentrating on your big toe or something, I would have run a mile. I wanted magic, I wanted ritual, I wanted mantra, tantra, and all the rest of it. And very soon after that, I was listening to Bhante's lectures on Reel to Reel originally. And I was absolutely enthralled by Bhante's lectures. And there weren't many books. There was the survey in that old Indian edition with that funny smell that it had, the sort of damp pages and ink, and various other things like the Essence of Zen. There was the FWBO newsletter as it was, Mind Reactive and Creative, the 3 jewels you could get hold of. But there wasn't a lot available, and general sort of Dharma books coming out. But it was the lectures. I can't remember what order I listened to them in, but it was a Higher Evolution series, Eightfold Path, Bodhisattva Ideal, Tantric Path series. Very, very, very important to me. I would say they're the foundation of my Dharma knowledge, such as it is. It all comes from those. And the thing is about listening to these lectures, looking back, and so many other lectures and seminars and over the years, Bhante is my educator. As I said, I was thrown out of school at 16. I was so bored. Now, in Bhante's lectures, as you all know, you don't just get Dharma. You get art, you get culture, you get literature, you get science, you get references to music and novels, you get references to history, to world affairs, and so many things. And he made it sound so interesting, so exciting, so alive, because all of it was the expression of Dharma. I wanted to follow up these things. They sounded so attractive. So my education came from those lectures and Bhante's writings. I'd go off and I'd read the poets he was quoting and so on. I wanted to know what was going on in these things as well as Dharma. So for me, Bhante is my educator in the broadest sense, thank goodness. Enriching me in so many ways, and we're communicating so many different languages, so many different ways of seeing the world and responding to the world. It's not a narrow thing, and the fact that he communicated the breadth of the Dharma, that it's not sectarian, that this deep passion and understanding that it's the whole of the Buddhist tradition that needs to be referenced, and needs to be appreciated, but of course applied to our circumstances and conditions, and therefore, over time he evolved a particular approaches to all that material in a very clear way. It wasn't entirely like that in those days. I mean, there was quite a lot of sorting out that we've done over the years, but it's the richness of Bhante's language and communication that I really love. Bhante had so many different ways of communicating, not just one way. I think this is really important. We have to be very careful, I think, when we systematize Bhante's work, that we don't leech it of its colour and life and its variety. He had a range of voices and ways of communicating. What interests me mostly about Bhante is Bhante's dialogue, to use that sort of language, I don't know if it's the right language, with the Buddhist tradition, or with tradition, with many traditions. It's the way he sort of stands between two worlds, the world of Buddhist tradition, the world of, traditional culture generally, facing into and in relationship to the modern world, the contemporary world. I think that is such an amazingly interesting, stimulating place. It's the place I want to be in. And I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of that, and we don't neglect the fact that Bhante was a great student all his life of traditional Buddhist texts. He never stopped reading the sutras, never stopped having the sutras and the suttas read to him, right to the end of his life. New sutra, new translation would come out, he'd want it read to him. He never stopped doing that. So it is really, I think, crucial as we go forward that we don't get too far away, from his example in that respect. So Bhante is a great educator to me. My first meeting with Bhante was in some ways rather underwhelming, it has to be said. So I, by this time, moved into our little community and centre in Brighton that Buddhadasa had got together. Bhante was in New Zealand on the first visit to New Zealand, and on his return he was really pleased to hear that a centre had been started in Brighton, because he used to do Dharma activities in Brighton in the very early days. When he was at Hampstead Buddhist Vihara, he'd go and give talks in Brighton, was very close to the people who ran the Brighton Buddhist Society, and Carl Ragg, the president of that, was still alive when Bhante, came down. He's a very lovely old man, and he presented to us when Bhante came to dedicate the shrine room. Carl presented to us this lovely set of lovely heavy brass puja bowls that Bhante had given to the Brighton Buddhist Society, and Carl said, "These are for you now." And they're still there down in the Brighton Buddhist Centre. But yes, Bhante was a bit of a surprise, because I thought, I'm going to beat my guru. My guru is coming. I decided Bhante is my guru. Never met him, but he is my guru. And you can imagine, 17, very excited, very naive, very, mouthy. And Bhante arrived wearing a rather dull grey Macintosh, raincoat, and very nondescript clothing. He had big boots on for some reason, like working men's boots. Long, sort of greasy hair, and those sort of funny bent glasses that he wore in those days. Definitely not like, the sort of grandfatherly Bhante here. Much rougher looking, much more like a sort of gypsy, much more like a sort of siddha type figure in some ways. And so I bounded up to Bhante to say hello, and he just sort of very lightly held my hand, looked away, looked to the other side of the room and said, "Hello," as if I wasn't there. It was really weird, very, very strange meeting. And there was this sort of sense of deflation, complete deflation. And of course, having read all the books on Tibetan Buddhism, you kind of start wondering, is this a teaching? Is he reflecting something back on me, and all that sort of nonsense that you go through? But a connection was made very, very strongly. I was really into looking after the shrine, and I wanted to develop a whole way of, I had even developed a sort of ritual for cleaning and caring for the shrine, and I showed the puja bowls that Carl had handed on to us, and Bhante taught me the ritual of filling puja bowls. He was really interested that I was interested in shrines, and he showed me how to fill them, and the mantras you should chant and the reflections you should have when you do that. And I eventually wrote a little shrine keeper's manual and sent it to him, and he was very pleased with that and wanted it published. It never did get published, but it sort of got published a few years ago. But so even though he was a bit, in some ways, aloof, apart, there was a connection made. There was one very strange incident where we were sitting in this tiny room in this terraced house, just me and Bhante. I don't know what Buddhadasa was up to, and Bhante was sitting in this very low chair, sort of like this, with these big boots and his jacket and his lank hair and those funny bent glasses, and he's just looking straight ahead. He could do that, couldn't he, Sarita? He could just sometimes just look straight ahead, and you didn't know what was going on, this sort of strong silence, and he wasn't making me feel comfortable, and I was sort of, sitting there and, feeling a bit strange, and he leaned over to the mantelpiece, picked up an incense stick, and with the bamboo end started to clean his ears in front of me. My response was, what would my mum say about that? Which is very interesting, isn't it? That was what I thought. Actually, this is quite a common sight in India. You see people in public giving their ears a good clean on trains and things like that. But it was a bit of a shock, to see Bhante behaving like that. There was this sort of untrammeled quality about Bhante. That there was something, I'd say wild, but when I say wild, I don't mean he was sort of freaking out all over the place and things like that. There was just something about him that you knew you could not sort of capture. That he was on something that nobody else was on. I mean, Aloka used to say when he came along to the movement in a bit before I did, at our centre, the then centre in North London in Archway, he said he thought that his impression was that Bhante was like a great big balloon, a sort of barrage balloon, that was just going up into the stratosphere, and the order members were sort of running around trying to sort of hold him down. That there was something about him that was just, was just going out there. And I don't know if you've seen the wonderful recent video from Adhisthana, from the what's it called? They've got Urgyen House. The one which got the photographs of Bhante doing the first Udana seminar under canvas. That gives you a very good feeling for what he was like. And you hear him also talking about the Udana, and which is a wonderful seminar that will be coming out. There was that kind of quality about Bhante, and I do think it's really important to understand this thing of Bhante really breaking out of all convention. It was so important to do that. I don't think we've got really any idea now what the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara and the Buddhist Society and that whole British Buddhist scene, it was so middle class and so buttoned up. You sort of got a mixture of Zen Theravada and Puritanism and Victorian values all in the mix together. And Bhante just had to break out of that. I mean, it's interesting. The only thing I wanted to bring of Bhante's this evening was this poem, I Want to Break Out. I want to break out, batter down the door, go tramping black heather all day on the windy moor, and at night in hayloft or under hedge, Find a companion suited to my mind. I want to break through, shatter time and space, cut up the void with a knife, pitch the stars from their place, nor shrink back when, lidded with darkness, the eye of reality opens and blinds me, blue as the sky. So there was still that kind of flavour to Bhante, when I came along, something that was not going to be shackled, by things. At the same time, when I came along, you could feel the sense of the movement beginning to form, to become more coherent. And, I know Bhante has said, that the ordinations of people like Subhuti and Lokamitra and Nagabodhi and so on were very, very important. Devamitra, Ashvajit and so on. They were very, very important people. Dharmadina, mustn't forget Dharmadina. There was a group of people. They were the Sangha that we found. Buddhadasa, I've mentioned him. Visantra and so on. They were becoming a much more sort of coherent community. So you could feel things forming and you could feel things getting more organised. And that is very important as well. One of the things about Bhante, and one of the things I think people find, over the years, people who've been close to Bhante, is that Bhante never stands still. Bhante never stood still in his life, ever. Even though he was very calm and silent and deep and so on. But in terms of responding to what needed to happen, he never ever stood still. He was always sort of moving on. He was always renouncing in that sense. And I think it's very important to understand that when you consider, Bhante's life. But even so, that quality of you're not able to encompass him, not able to sort of box him in any way, I think it never left, never went away at all. I think there was never I never had a sense with Bhante that anything was final. And any attempts to kind of create Bhante, recreate Bhante's teaching into a sort of closed system is sort of doomed to failure, quite rightly, because I think it was always open, always something that you could never quite pin down. He makes this very clear in his interview, What is the Western Buddhist Order?, where he defines closely what the order is. He had to, because people coming up with all sorts of ideas of what the order is and talking about it as his disciples, the disciples of his disciples, talking about our doctrines and practices and so on. But then, right at the end, he says there's something about me, there's something about the order, there's something about the movement that you cannot define, that is indefinable. And it's so important that we keep in touch with that and we keep that alive. So I think that's very important. You get a double message from Bhante, great clarity about what's needed. And we need clarity. We need real clarity and organisation. At the same time, we mustn't lose connection with that quality, that indefinable something that is the life of life. It's the life of our order. And I guess for me, that's particularly associated with ordination itself. My life really begins at ordination, and everything is unfolding and continues to unfold from ordination, which is a bit weird considering that I was the most, in a sense, significant moment of my life happened at 19, so early on in my life. But when I say it really started then, I'm talking about an encounter with something which is, I don't think, can be defined by time. I'm not making any claims when I say this. I'm just talking about something which remains alive and continues to unfold and which never loses its freshness. I'm not at all nostalgic about my past. I'm not nostalgic about even the person I was when I was ordained. I'm glad I've learnt some lessons between the age of 19 and 64 next month. So I have no nostalgia about the good old days and my good old days. No, that's a mug's game. You know, I don't think there's ever been a sort of golden age. The best age is always now. That's the best age to be in. I really feel that. Nonetheless, there was something that went on a weekend retreat in a farmhouse in Thetford Forest, which I don't know how you call it. Perhaps it's best just to describe it, you know, and describe Bhante, what he looked like on that occasion. So he got dressed up. I mean, he used to wear his yellow robes in those days, these deep yellow robes, patched robes. Still had the long hair. But on this occasion, he, on mine and Ratnaguna's ordination, he also put on this wonderful Tibetan shirt. It was a sort of orange gold, very, very warm colours, embossed with dragons. It was sort of Chinese brocade made into one of those Tibetan style high collar shirts, big sleeves. And he also had these beads, this mala that I'd never seen, and he was really playing me. Lokamitra said to him, "Oh, Bhante, I've never seen you dressed like this before." And Bhante said, "Well, as Richard, that was my name, is into things Tibetan, I thought I ought to dress up." And I said, "What about the beads, Bhante?" He said, "These beads were given to me by Mr. Chen. They're called moon and star beads. They're very hard." He seemed to like the fact that they were very hard beads, and you could see they had little speckles on them, small speckles and big speckles, like the moon and the stars. And he also had every so often white beads. And I said, "Why do you have white beads, Bhante, on it?" He said, "That's after every 27 beads for certain practices." So certain practices, you know, what practices? So, you know, he was really, practicing, I think, the rite of fascination quite naturally, kind of drawing me in. But, I won't go into the details of my ordination. I just remember that going into the little room where he was ordaining me, a very, very simple shrine. I mean, it wasn't like all the elaborate stuff that we have these days. It was very, very simple. In that very, very simple ceremony, the entire essence of my Dharma life was transmitted. That is no exaggeration. Everything was in that ceremony. Everything was in Bhante that I needed. Everything particularly was concentrated in the mantra and in the name. Everything was there and that's been proved through time. Everything has unfolded out of that. I can't even tell you what it is. I don't know what it is. I mean, people sometimes say, "Why do you meditate on the yidam that you meditate on?" I say, "Well, I can't tell you. I don't know. I just have to do it. I have to meditate on this figure every day. I have to say that mantra every day. I want to do it every day." I could give you all sorts of reasons. I know the reasons back to front and inside out and upside down. But I just have to. It's the most wonderful, meaningful thing in my life that perfumes and pervades everything. Everything. Everything comes from that. Everything goes back to that. And my name, whenever I hear my name, there's always, on some level, a memory of Bhante announcing my name at my public ordination, where, first thing he said, it's one of the names of Padmavajra, who he said I'm devoted to, and everybody laughed at that. They thought that was very, very funny for some reason. Bhante said, but there's a bit more to it than that, that the lotus represents the unfolding so-called feminine qualities of the spiritual life, compassion and so on, and the Vajra represents the hard, cutting, determined wisdom, so-called masculine aspect of the spiritual life, and you must have both blended. Well, that's a teaching, that's a precept, that's a Dharma teaching. But above all, looking back on that occasion, and there was a tremendous sort of ramifications from the ordination. In many ways, even though it was so wonderful, it was too much. I felt really burnt by it afterwards, and it took me a long time, I would say about 14 years, probably until I ended up here, working out what it meant to be an order member, getting some sort of purchase on what the Dhammacharya's life is, and making all sorts of mistakes and going down wrong paths. But there was something that stayed the same and kept me on course. And looking back at that ordination, if you like, one of the essential elements of it, Bhante described what goes on in ordination years later. He talks about it as a witnessing. As a witnessing, he uses that language. That's what ordination is. You're not getting anything at ordination. This is why I don't like this language of training for ordination. I'd much prefer it if we stayed with deepening going for refuge to the point where it's effective. Because you're not getting anything. What's happening is you're being seen. You're being seen at the deepest possible level by the people and by the man who you most respect and revere. I mean, that's what it was like for me. The man I most revered was seeing me as I really am, seeing what I could really be, and taking that completely seriously, taking it more seriously than I take it myself. That's quite something. To be seen like that, to be witnessed like that, to be it being communicated directly that this is true, this is real, this is the real you, to live like that. Well, that's quite something. That's quite something if you take that very, very seriously. But that's what ordination really is for everybody. And Bhante did really see you. I mean, in later years when I'd go and see Bhante, I often thought, oh, maybe I should ask him about what I should really do with my, am I doing the right thing? And has he got any advice? I thought, for goodness sake, don't ask that question. Because if he tells you and you don't like it, what are you going to do? Don't ask him that question because you want to be a good disciple. And I thought, well, he sees you anyway. Don't try and hide anything. That's just a joke. I remember Aloka saying that quite strongly. He said, when you go and see Bhante, for goodness sake, don't pretend. Don't play around. It's a waste of time because he's taking everything in. It's true. It's true. And I have been looked at by Bhante. It's quite a thing to be looked at by Bhante. The time I most remember when I was looked at by Bhante, as you can see, I'm rambling around in time. We are in the timeless zone at the moment. Was on a train. And it was before I was ordained. We'd gone down to Brighton. I was living in London then, and we'd gone down to Brighton where he was launching the 1,000 Petal Lotus. That was what his memoirs were called, that became eventually the Rainbow Road, and he was launching it at a place in Brighton. But I'm showing slides as well, and I'd gone with him. And he told me on that visit that he was going to ordain me. So I was very excited, and that was almost like being ordained, being told by Bhante that he was going to ordain me. And it was very lovely what he said, again, being taken completely seriously. He said, you don't have to go through things to lead a full spiritual life. Because I think people, quite rightly, how can you really take a kid of... And I was a very immature 19-year-old by then. How can you take something like that completely seriously in terms of their commitment? I can understand it now. So people had doubts. Well, he's never been through a relationship. He hasn't really suffered. So how can he really live this life? That was the sort of narrative in those days. But Bhante said, you don't have to go through things, probably knowing full well that I would go through things, even if I was an order member. I mean, he's not daft. And he said, and this is interesting for you, if any of you are officially young people in Triratna, he said, young people have a lot to offer the Dharma. Young people have a lot to offer the Dharma. 19 was young in those days, 30 was really old. So I was one of the original youngsters. So anyway, we were going back on the train to London, and for some reason we were on a stopping train from Brighton to Victoria. I mean, it took forever. I think it was the last train. And Bhante obviously didn't want to talk, so he'd been around the second-hand bookshops, and he handed me some books to read. And I fell asleep reading these books. And I'd wake up, and Bhante was on the edge of his seat, sitting opposite me like this. And he was looking at me with this extraordinary expression. It was like delight, eagerness, really looking into me, and I'd woke up and I think, oh, blimey. I felt he was looking into my soul. It was the weirdest of things. I felt completely safe. I didn't feel frightened or anything like that, but I really felt seen and actually delighted in. Didn't talk about it, and when we got back to Sakavati, that was it. We didn't talk about it the next day or anything like that. But it was a real communication. To be seen like that, by a spiritual friend is quite something. It definitely does something to you. We talk about the Indian idiom of taking darshan of a teacher, but the darshan is the other way as well. The teacher, the spiritual friend, is also looking at you and looking into you and taking you in. So yes, I've been seen by Bhante, I've been witnessed by Bhante, I've been taken very seriously by Bhante. And after he died, and I was reflecting a lot on what I've been given by Bhante and all these different things I've been given, these incredible riches, and thinking about my ordination and, meditations and all these things and all the Dharma that's poured into me. And then I thought, well, actually, one way I could characterize what I've been given by Bhante is this insistence that I could take responsibility for myself and that I should take responsibility for myself, and that he had complete confidence in me that any decision I would make about my own life and the needs of other people, he would have complete faith in my action. I've got a letter up in my room, and I've lost quite a few of the letters and cards that Bhante sent me, but I've got a letter upstairs where he's getting me to make up my mind about a particular decision. And in that letter he says, I am sure whatever decision you come to, it will be in the best interests of yourself and everybody else concerned. Indeed, I think the same about any decision you might make about your life, or about your own life or about other people. This strong insistence that I take responsibility for myself. So many conversations, so many meetings, and it didn't always involve words. There was this sense of, come on, Padmavajra, you can live this life. You can do what needs to be done here, because my tendency is always a devotional one. My preferred mode is to serve. My preferred mode is always to be behind a big man, if you like, and to serve them. I'm averse to any kind of leadership or anything of that nature. I really am. I've never wanted that, never wanted to take responsibility in that way. But his message was always, 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 you can take responsibility, you should take responsibility. Sometimes that was incredibly encouraging, sometimes that was incredibly challenging. So that was an interesting thing to remember after Bhante's death. I've been talking now for quite a long time, I think. I've lost track of time. And I probably need to start winding up things. I mean, there's so many things to say. So many things to say about Bhante. I've been doing a lot of teaching, communicating to India. So I'm very, very conscious of Bhante and India. And I had the great good fortune of being with Bhante in India when he returned to India. I was there because of Bhante. I wouldn't have been there without Bhante. I don't think I had any particular interest in going to India. But it was Bhante, talking so incredibly beautifully about India and showing slides and photographs of him teaching what we called the ex-untouchable Buddhists. And I was also very close to Lokamitra. Lokamitra is one of my Kalyana Mitras. I love Lokamitra, still love Lokamitra. And when I met Lokamitra, check this out. I was in a study group when I was a Mitra at Aryatara. And who was in the study group? Lokamitra and Subhuti in the same study group. And I mean, Buddhadasa is an incredible order member, very, very dedicated, but in a way quite quiet in his communication. Subhuti and Lokamitra, I mean, it was energy city. I mean, these two guys, their enthusiasm and energy for the Dharma, for Bhante, for the life, I mean, it was just pouring off them. It was like an infectious disease. Oh, that's probably not a good metaphor. But, I absolutely caught this thing that these two were sort of generating. I mean, it was sort of, I came off this Mitra day from being in this group with these guys, just full of this kind of weird but amazing kind of energy for the Dharma. And I particularly connected with Lokamitra and lived with him at number 5 Balmore Street. And when he decided to go and start things in India, he was asked, he was visiting India to study yoga with Mr. Iyengar in Pune, and Bhante said, why not look up some of my old disciples? Surita was with Lokamitra on this trip. He's got some tales to tell. And when Lokamitra started to teach in Pune, the Buddhists, who were old disciples of Bhante, said, please come and start a centre. Please come. There's been nothing since Bhante. There's been no teaching since Bhante. It's all become politicised. Please come. And Lokamitra took an 8-week retreat up at Shravasti to really think about it, and decided that, yes, he would do it after talking with Bhante, and he wanted help. And I was fed up. By this time I was working at Sakavati and I didn't really want to work. And I thought, yeah, let's go to India and, I'll see Bhante's teachers and save people. In my early 20s, I was so naive. Apparently Bhante didn't want me to go. I discovered years later, a buyer said to me, he said, Bhante really didn't want you to go. He's much too immature. I can imagine it. And he was right. But actually, it was great going to India. I learned so much going to India. And one of the things I learned was how to serve. My relationship with Bhante had got a bit weird. There was this incredible experience of being ordained, but I sort of wanted more. Incredible. And I remember, not long after I was ordained, there was a seminar here on mind in Buddhist psychology, which was 10 days of sheer hell as far as I was concerned. I mean, the text was really difficult, especially these definitions of negative mental events. I was just full of all of them. and the definitions of positive mental events were so high, I didn't have any of them. Moreover, Bhante was just blanking me. You know, I can look back and see why. I mean, because I was so sort of wanting so much attention, and but I got the black Teflon energy vibe, you know, which was very, very disconcerting. So things, you know, things in that sense weren't very good. But when I was in India, thankfully, and to be truthful, I didn't really know how to communicate with Bhante. I was in awe of Bhante. I didn't know how to be with him. I didn't know what was required. Of course, what was required was for me to be friendly and interested in him, I discovered later, and not to sort of treat him as a sort of guru thing, which is what I was doing. But in India, I decided, well, I'm not going to get into that state. That's awful. And because in India, people really know how to serve and really know how to host, and I'd watched them doing that, I thought, that's how I need to be for Bhante. So when Bhante came, I was his attendant, and it was one of the happiest 2 weeks of my life. And I'd really struggled in India before that time. I found it hellish in India. But it was just great, making tea for Bhante, bringing him water, putting up his mosquito net, cleaning his room, typing his letters, hosting visitors, making sure they were okay, washing his robes. I thought, this is it. This is the best way I can express my communication with Bhante. Don't even try to have be the disciple receiving the teachings. That's not what this is about. Service. This is what it's about. And I've been thinking a lot about watching Bhante teach in India. I've been talking about it with friends in India, and his incredible sensitivity to people in India. People in the West have no idea. You know, a lot of rubbish gets said about Bhante because people just don't know Bhante. They've just heard people talk a lot of rubbish about him, and they don't know him. They've not seen him in all sorts of, conditions. I remember, a politician, an old disciple of Bhante, came to see me in Lokamitra, Dadasaheb Rupawati, a Congress leader. And he sat before us and he was in tears talking about Bhante. He said, when we took Bhante to our district, our Mednagar, very, very poor part of Maharashtra, the Buddhists there incredibly poor. He said, Bhante was just incredible. This was back in the early 60s. He said, we'd never seen anybody like it because Bhante would sleep anywhere. He'd sleep on the floor in these rough village places. He'd drink our water, bad water. He'd eat our food. He didn't mind walking from village to village. He didn't mind travelling in a bullock cart, which is a very uncomfortable mode of travel, I can assure you. He didn't mind riding on the back of somebody's bicycle. And he just talked to us and communicated with us. And Dadasaheb, was a very, very hard-headed politician, close to Mrs. Gandhi. And he was just in tears, just talking about the way Bhante gave himself on that tour. And nobody has seen Bhante like that, in the West. Nobody knows, what he was like. But I could see how he was with people in India. This incredible sensitivity. I remember watching him. I was, in India, space is very, very different. And I was watching him in his room talk to a new Dhammacharini, Dhammalochana, in Hindi. Bhante knew Hindi. And I think he was explaining to her sadhana before he left to go to England. And I could see he was using very, very gentle, very soft Hindi and explaining to her very carefully, how to practice the sadhana, and his quality of attention, his quality of care in relation to her and her devotion to him. I mean, it was an extraordinary, vision of what real communication can be. But the other thing I noticed was his sensitivity to the predicament of Buddhist people. I had a memory the other day, I've been telling friends in India about this. Lokamitra and I were quite, in a way, surprised and shocked, and in a way, not sure what to do when discovering how factional the Buddhist community was. I don't mean people necessarily getting involved with us, but we realised that in Pune there were so many factions within the Buddhist community. The Buddhist community is very, very split, and we were talking to Bhante about it, and about what this meant, and I think we maybe were a bit moralistic about it. Shouldn't they be more together? And Bhante said, no, look, listen, you have to understand that this community has been repressed, for thousands of years. They've been at the bottom and pushed down and denied their humanity, for all these centuries. That builds up enormous frustration, incredible anger, but that's not going to be expressed easily out in relation to the higher caste, the so-called higher caste. So it's going to come out among them. So he was trying to get across to us, trying to get us to understand, if you like, the psychological effects of that sort of situation. He was trying to get us to be more deeply compassionate and understanding of what we were discovering, in communicating the Dharma there. I've never forgotten that conversation, his deep sympathy for that community. and he used to have fun. I remember the first council meeting of Trilokya Bauddha Mahasangha Sahayak Gana, because we didn't know what to call ourselves when we started in India. We couldn't call ourselves the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. We just called ourselves Bauddha Mitra Sangha, the Sangha of Buddhist friends. And we thought that's what we would be. But Bhante said, no, your name is going to be Trilokya Bauddha Mahasangha Sahayak Gana, the body of helpers of the great Buddhist spiritual community of the Triple World. Which I think is a fantastic name, and I really wish we were that everywhere, I must say. Triple World being the entire universe and cosmos. I think that's a much better name. But anyway, we're Triratna and all that. But when he was explaining it, he did a wonderful explanation of what Trilokya was. He gave the traditional Kama Loka, Rupa Loka, Arupa Loka. So this is our new council of Indian order members, and me and Lokamitra. And then he talked about developing world, underdeveloped world, developing world, developed world, physical, psychological, spiritual, went through all the permutations of what the triple world could be, and that our Dhamma, our teaching, our Sangha was in relation to all of that, And then, with great glee, he told us about a bodhisattva called Trilokya Vijaya, the conqueror of the triple world, who's found in a particular tantric text. I think it's actually an emanation of Vairochana and a form of Vajrapani. And you could feel Bhante's connection with the aspirations of that community and what they were getting out of, because you have to remember that these Hindu gods and goddesses, for people, of that background, Buddhist people, are really symbols of tremendous oppression and superstition and ignorance. They're not neutral. They're not quaint Oriental exotica. They are symbols of tremendous oppression. But more than that was watching him in these lectures, with these big lectures, thousands of people, and smaller lectures in different localities. These were in central Pune, these big lectures. And watching Bhante's immediate rapport. And at these lectures, there was young, old, men, women, children, as you get in India. And it was obvious some of them were very uneducated, probably some of them were illiterate. And everybody was rapt listening to these lectures. They had a very good translator translating into Marathi. But Bhante was so direct. I learned a lot about how to communicate the Dharma watching Bhante. It wasn't so much, it was no technique. I'm not talking about technique. I'm talking about somebody really attuned to the people. You could see it. And I've said this a number of times. I mentioned it this morning. He started one lecture, but with a few thousand people. And Lokamitra and I in our teaching had always concentrated on very, very basic things. So Bhante launched into a lecture by describing the Yogacara system of consciousness, the 8 consciousnesses. So eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body, mind. So the 6 sense consciousnesses, then the defiled mind consciousness, Klishto Mano Vijnana, Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness. And I'm sitting there listening to him, I'm thinking, where are you going? What are you doing? And I'm watching the people, and they are all engaged. Everybody's on the edge of their seat listening, because where are we going? And then he started to talk more about the Klishto Mano Vijnana, the defiled mind consciousness, the consciousness that discriminates, that distinguishes between an imagined self and imagined other, the basic delusion. And then he said very, very dramatically, and this is where caste comes from. This is where the notion of untouchability comes from. In other words, it comes from deep within our minds. And at that moment, the entire crowd just all started to applaud. They do that in India when you make a really good point. They just all start clapping. And I thought, wow, that was extraordinary what you did there. It was an incredible thing. And he always used to say that, when he first started teaching Buddhist people, friends, high caste Hindu friends would say to him, Sangharakshita, how can they understand, the Dharma? I mean, they're very, very ignorant people. And Bhante said, people had no difficulty understanding the deepest truths of Buddhism. They might not have been educated, they might have been illiterate, but they could understand the deepest truths of Buddhism. If you could find a way of communicating those truths that had relevance and practical relevance to their lives. And I saw that. And those occasions were incredible, because after the lectures, I'd have to, because I was the attendant, I had to gather up all the garlands that were given, great mountains of garlands and flowers, because in India people really know how to do things with flowers and speeches and fairy lights and everything else. And I had to put his sandals on his feet, and we'd go through the crowd to find his car. And again, I had a very interesting experience after one of these talks. People were crowding in to touch him, particularly older people, particularly older women, wanted to touch Bhante, because people were coming from all over, coming from the villages to hear, Bhante, and they were coming, and I thought, oh, look, no, come on, we've got to get Bhante home. He's tired. He's been talking for an hour and a half, and so I'd try and clear them out the way, and Bhante just put his hand on my shoulder, very gently but very firmly, and said, "No, you must not do that. This is very, very important for people that they have this contact." And I could really feel his compassion. Compassion for the people, not to do with his own aggrandizement, nothing like that, but his compassion for people who needed a connection with him and what he was bringing, the Dharma, what he was communicating, what he was the messenger of, the medium of, and compassion for me. For my ignorance, if you like, and my lack of culture. And I remember, we'd go back to our little cottage where we were staying, that a very friendly Buddhist had let us use. And, it was amazing back there, because all these garlands would be hanging up, and Bhante really liked to have all the garlands. And some of them very sweet smelling, and the atmosphere was so exalted, and I was sort of overwhelmed at times. I remember one night after putting up his mosquito net, I said to him, oh, Bhante, I don't know what, I didn't know what to say. And I said, Bhante, I don't know what I will do, when you die. And he looked at me and said, well, that's assuming that I'll die first. And it was really direct, and he was looking at me again. And I got out of that room really fast, and gave me a lot to think about. And perhaps that's a good note to end on. There is so many more things to say. In a way, ending on the note of the Vajra Guru. And I thought we would. Is it? I think it's chanting now, isn't it? Is it? Did we say we chant now, Vajra Guru? I want us to chant for a little bit the Padmasambhava mantra, the Vajra Guru mantra. Bhante, of course, is Urgyen. Sangharakshita, the great Kachu Rinpoche, named him Urgyen Sangharakshita. Sangharakshita from the land of Urgyen, the land of Padmasambhava, when he initiated him into the Padmasambhava practice. And we'll do that slow, longing version of the mantra, calling on the Guru from afar, and really calling up, the qualities of Bhante, the qualities that he's blessed us with. And, perhaps while we're doing this, reflecting that one of the things I should have also said, that I've been reflecting a lot on Bhante's emphasis on the human being. I've been looking at talks in India, particularly religion and the secular state, which he gave under the auspices of a right-wing Hindu organisation in the 1980s. It's a very strong talk. And he's rejoicing in the secular state, because in the secular state you are a human being before you're a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jain, a Parsi. You are a human being first and foremost. That's what the Buddha is really talking about. The Dharma is the deeply human. The Dharma is the deeply human. And Bhante had this deep faith that any human being could communicate with any other human being. Any human being could befriend any other human being. And in this age, where everybody seems, not everybody, but a lot of people seem to be dividing humanity by claiming an extra identity over and above their human beingness. Terrible things are going on because of people's sectarian, religious, or whatever particular kind of identity they're claiming. And of course it's a desperate attempt, but a doomed attempt to be deeply human. We really need this teaching of Bhante's to really communicate the deeply human. That's what's needed right now. And as a Buddhist community, we need to exemplify that. The deeply human. That's what being a Dharma-farer really means, to be deeply human. Human on the deepest level, human on the highest level. Bhante gave us that. So when we chant this mantra, that's what we're really invoking for the world. Om Ahum Vajra Guru Padmasi